Hey everybody, this is my 55-gallon Gourami tank, and today we are going to do a simple before and after video. I've really got to get in here and do some maintenance on this tank and get it cleaned up. I don't think the water's that bad, but I'm getting really tired of looking at the tank the way it is. I did a big chemi-clean treatment not too long ago, and I've never really come back and finished up anything afterwards. The bubbles are still in there, despite the fact that I haven't put the chemi-clean in there in a few weeks. I've just never gotten around to taking the bubbles out. I've never gotten around to getting in there and wiping the glass down or cleaning any of that up. And now I'm starting to notice right in that trouble spot that I had, you can see how that is starting to develop that sort of dark green clumps in there. That is the cyanobacteria starting to come back. All the rest of this crud is algae and detritus and dead stuff. So I'm going to get in there. I'm not worried about the back glass or anything, especially today. I don't have a ton of time, but I really just kind of have a bee in my bonnet to get this taken care of today. And so we're going to get the glass wiped down in the front and get all that crud off of there. My rubber lip pleco in there has been working on it diligently for me and has removed a lot of it. You can see how he's brought it all the way down here. But I'm going to get in there and wipe up the rest of that, get that all cleaned out while we're doing a water change. And more importantly, I'm going to get in there and remove a bunch of that Java Windelov. That will go into a bucket in the other room. I'll get it cleaned up. I'll do a chemi-clean treatment, rinse it, get it all cleaned, and eventually I will have a bunch of Java Windelov for sale if it turns out to be salvageable. If it's just got too much crud and grossness on it or whatever, I'll just have to write it off as a loss, but we'll see how that goes in the future. But I do just about always have plants available, so if you're interested in or looking for aquatic plants of the Java or Anubias or water sprite nature, let me know. My email's down below. Contact me. We'll talk about it. In the meantime, we're going to say there's your before and there's your after. So I wound up doing quite a lot of work while I was in there. I removed a lot more of the Java Windelov than I intended to, but once I started peeling it up, it all just sort of started breaking loose from the rocks. A lot of it was attached to the woodwork. I know it's hard to tell, but that whole entire centerpiece right there is all a big chunk of wood. So in addition to all of that piece of woodwork I've got at this end of the tank, I do have this large piece of wood as well. And the Java was growing mostly attached to that, but you can see where the roots had already grown way down here on the rock and were attached. This one little clump on this smaller rock in the front is all that remained attached. And then the rest of it broke off. So I am actually going to, well, not all of it. You can see I've got some down there, and then of course all of this big patch of it is something completely separate, and then that is just regular old Java fern over there. So I have an entire bucket full of the Java Windelov that I pulled out of there, and what I'm going to do is black it out. I'm going to put it in a cardboard box or just cover it in a plastic bag or something and let it sit in darkness for 2 or 3 days and see what happens. I'm not very good at identifying different species of algae, but I think this is blackbeard algae or something really similar to that. I tried wiping it off the glass and it was really difficult to get off the glass. I wound up resorting to a good old-fashioned razor blade for a scraper. I usually don't do anything fancy about scrapers. I just use a standard, we used to call these Gillette Blue Blades back in the day. It's just a standard scraping razor blade. I just put my hand in the tank and I go down and I scrape the glass. Now you got to be careful when you get to the bottom. You don't want to get any of the grit or substrate caught behind the razor blade as you pull it back up. That grit will scratch your glass. And the same thing goes if you're using any kind of soft cloth or anything on your glass. If you get it down near the bottom and any of that gravel or substrate gets caught in the cloth and then you rub that cloth against the glass, you will then scratch your glass. So you got to be careful when you're doing that cleaning work down near your substrate like that. So the stuff was so thick that my polyester batting that I use for my filter material, that barely touched it as far as wiping it off. I then went to my melamine sponges, the magic eraser if you will, and that had no real impact. I was just using a lot of elbow grease and I wasn't getting very far, and so that's when I busted out the old razor blade and we just got in there and scraped it all clean. So I use razor blades one time and then throw them away because they're just going to get rusty or whatever. They're really, really cheap. I bought 100 of them for like $10 or something years ago, and I still haven't even gone through half of the pack yet. I don't use them that often, so it's not that big a deal. I use one and throw it away. And remember, when you throw stuff away, you are not the last person that has to deal with that refuse. So whenever you're throwing anything sharp, broken glass, bottles, cracked glasses, old razor blades, etc., make sure you dispose of them properly. Wrap them up so they're not going to hurt anybody else that has to handle that once you've thrown it away and forgotten about it. Again, other people are going to be handling that, so dispose of the sharps properly, please. You can see in the back there's a couple of little swipe marks. That is from my fingernails. I literally got in there and just scraped my nails across the back to see how easily any of that stuff would come off, because when I tried to run my fingers across it, I couldn't get it to budge. Again, that stuff is really, really grown on there heavily. So I scraped all the front glass down, got all that cleaned up. That put so much crud and detritus in the tank that I did probably about a 60 to 70% water change, and then filled the tank back up, let all the stuff settle on the bottom, and it was just like an inch deep. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. It was a lot of crud on the bottom. So I went and vacked it again and went back through it and did maybe another 20% water change on top of that to get a lot of that detritus out of there that had settled down. While I was doing all this, I did change out the filter. The filter was surprisingly not that dirty, but I did change out the filter and we got all that cleaned up. I cleaned up the filter intake. The filter intake was actually dirtier than the filter, and that might have something to do with why the filter wasn't very dirty. It was, a lot of stuff wasn't even getting past the intake. It was getting clogged up in that mess. So, all in all, I am going to try to maybe put some of that Java Windelov back in the tank once I've blacked it out. But I want to see what blacking it out does. I really think that this is some kind of algae, and it's really nasty and growing in there all over everything. I'm considering getting some nearite snails, because nearite snails do wonders for some of the more difficult kinds of algae that other fish tend not to bother with. Green spot algae, for example, nearite snails will eat that, and they will eat hair algae, so they might eat this stuff. My only concern is that I've got loaches in this tank, and even a large snail like a nearite snail can be susceptible to loaches. They will basically force the snail to stay withdrawn in its shell all the time. Anytime they expose any of their flesh, the loaches will try to bite at it and nibble at it, and then they'll just withdraw back into their shell, and eventually they'll just starve to death. I had that happen early on in the hobby. When I first started keeping fish, I tried to keep the mystery snails in the same tank as the loaches, and I found out that that's exactly what happens, is the mystery snails wind up just clamping shut and staying clamped shut until they eventually starve to death. So I don't know if I'd be able to get away with having the nearite snails in this tank or not, but I might just do a periodic water change and get in there with the razor blade and just do what I did today. It was a little bit labor intensive, but that's what you get when you get lax in your upkeep and you let your tank get way behind and everything else, which is what I've done to this. So nobody's fault but my own. I'm not acting like I'm surprised that this is happening. I'm just discussing my potential ways forward to get this tank cleaned up and looking good. I do have plans for this tank. I got an idea of the fish that I want to add to it, but we're going to get it cleaned up, looking good, and sort of replanted before we do that. So make sure you're subscribed, and you won't miss that or anything else I've got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. So thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you're subscribed, as I said, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.